When my intern accused me of being incompetent and old in front of the entire hospital, I didn't say a single word. I just smiled. Because she had no idea that exactly 72 hours later, her entire career would be at my fingertips. It would have been so easy to stamp rejected on her CV right then and there. But no, I chose to teach her a lesson she would never forget. You won't believe what happened when she walked through that door. If you're ready, the game begins. Please subscribe, because this is the voice of justice. I am Clara. I have spent 15 years on that fine line between life and death in one of Houston's busiest hospitals. I am a senior nurse instructor. For me, this job isn't just about inserting IVs or tracking medication. It is about patience, discipline, and a deep respect for human life. This place is my home, and my team is like my family. Every year, dozens of interns arrive. Some are scared but eager, others hungry to learn. Shaping them, raising the lifesavers of the future, is my greatest pride. However, this term, everything started differently. I will never forget the moment she walked through the door. Ava Thompson. With her pristine, perfectly pressed uniform, a brand-name watch on her wrist worth a nurse's salary, and that "I own this place" expression on her face. From day one, with her attitude of refusing to touch patients, looking down on menial tasks, and constantly bragging about how influential her father was, Ava hadn't come to learn. She had come to rule. I pulled her aside a few times to warn her. "Ava," I said calmly, "it's not your rank or your family that matters here, but how much compassion you show the patient." But every time, she rolled her eyes. She gave me looks implying I was old school and didn't understand technology. I was patient, because I was a professional. But that Tuesday evening was the last straw. The ER was chaotic. A chain reaction traffic accident had come in, and every second was vital. I saw Ava performing an incorrect procedure on a trauma patient. I intervened immediately, gently but firmly correcting her and showing her the right way. That was the moment all hell broke loose. Ava slammed the tray she was holding onto the counter. The chaotic noise of the ER was cut like a knife. All the doctors, nurses, even the patients on the stretchers turned to us. Ava pointed her finger at my face and shouted, "Enough, Clara, your methods are from the dinosaur age. I learned modern medical techniques at the best schools. You can't order me around just because you have seniority. This hospital can't progress because of visionless people like you. Get out of my way." Silence. The only thing I heard at that moment was the beep of the monitors. I felt my face burning. I am 38 years old. I have given my life to this job, and a 22-year-old girl had trampled my professional honor in front of everyone. The interns were looking at me with fear. They expected me to answer, to shout, to fire her right there. But I didn't. I took a deep breath. I looked into her eyes and just said, "Get back to work, Ava. Patients are waiting." Ava flipped her hair and walked away like a victorious commander. Whispers started behind her. How did Clara stay silent? The girl literally crushed her. I couldn't sleep when I went home that night. Only that moment of humiliation was before my eyes. But I didn't know then that fate had a wonderful plan for those who wait. Exactly 3 days later. I came to my office in the morning, grabbed my coffee, and opened the staff recruitment evaluation file on my desk. HR had sent me the list of those who had finished their internship and wanted to be hired for my approval. I lifted the cover of the top file, and at that moment I took the most enjoyable sip of coffee of my life. Name: Ava Thompson. Application: Permanent Nursing Assistant. Reference note: Department head approval required. Ava had never calculated who her application would go to, that the signature of that woman she called a dinosaur would determine her life. I picked up the file. The morning sun filtering into the room was illuminating her name on the paper. I picked up my pen. I could have rejected her immediately. That would have been the easiest way, but no. I picked up the internal phone and called my secretary. "Sarah, please call Ava Thompson to my office for an interview. Immediately." When I hung up the phone, my heart was pounding. because this wasn't going to be just an interview. This would be the moment arrogance hit a wall, and the surprise awaiting her when she walked in would be the revenge not just for me, but for the entire hospital. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on my office door. I took a deep breath, leaned back in my chair, and said, "Come in," with the calmest voice I could manage. The door opened and Ava walked in with that same confident stride, her heels clicking against the tile floor like she was walking down a runway instead of coming to a job interview. She had her resume folder in one hand and her expensive leather purse in the other, and that same superior smile was plastered across her face. But the moment her eyes met mine, that smile froze like someone had hit pause on a video. Her face went from confident to confused to absolutely horrified in about 3 seconds flat. It was like watching a computer crash in real time. Her mouth opened slightly, her eyes widened, and I could literally see her brain trying to process what was happening. She stood there in the doorway, 1 foot in and 1 foot out, like she was considering just running away right then and there. I gestured to the chair across from my desk without breaking eye contact. "Please, Ava, have a seat. We have a lot to discuss." My voice was professional, calm, almost friendly, which I could tell was making her even more nervous. She walked forward slowly, like she was approaching a lion's den, and sat down on the edge of the chair like she might need to bolt at any second. Her hands were gripping her resume folder so tightly that her knuckles were turning white. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, watching her squirm. Then I picked up her application file and opened it slowly, making sure she could see her own name on the cover. "So, Ava Thompson," I said, flipping through the pages, "you've applied for a permanent position as a nursing assistant here at Memorial Grace Hospital. That's quite an ambitious goal for someone who just finished their internship 3 days ago." She swallowed hard and I could see her throat moving. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly, and I almost laughed at the ma'am part because just 3 days ago she was calling me a dinosaur in front of the entire emergency room staff. "I've wanted to work here permanently since I started my training. This hospital has an excellent reputation, and I believe I would be a valuable addition to the team." I nodded slowly, like I was considering her words very carefully. "A valuable addition," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air between us. "That's interesting, Ava, because I've been reviewing your performance during your internship period, and I have to say, the feedback has been quite mixed." I opened a second folder that I had prepared that morning, one that contained every single incident report, every complaint from senior staff, every time she had shown up late or refused to do basic tasks because she thought they were beneath her. Her face was getting paler by the second. I started reading from the reports out loud, keeping my voice neutral and professional. March 15th, refused to assist with patient bathing, claiming it wasn't part of her educational requirements. March 22nd, arrived 45 minutes late to morning shift without calling ahead. April 3rd, spoke disrespectfully to Dr. Harrison when he asked her to prepare medication trays. April 10th, failed to follow proper sterilization protocols despite 3 separate warnings. I looked up at her over the top of the file. Should I continue, or are you starting to remember these incidents? Ava was staring at her lap now, her face bright red, and I could see her fingers trembling slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but it was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "I'm sorry," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I didn't quite catch that. Could you speak up, please?" This time she looked up at me and her eyes were actually starting to get wet, like she might cry. I said, "I'm sorry, Ms. Mitchell. I made mistakes during my internship." "Mistakes?" I repeated, sitting back in my chair. "That's one word for it. But let me read you one more report, Ava, because this one is particularly interesting." I pulled out a separate sheet of paper, one that I had typed up myself that morning. April 17th, 8:15 p.m., emergency room. Intern Ava Thompson publicly berated senior nurse educator Clara Mitchell in front of approximately 15 staff members and multiple patients, accusing her of using outdated methods and being an obstacle to hospital progress. She told Ms. Mitchell to, and I quote, "get out of my way." The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming. Ava was frozen in her chair, staring at me with absolute terror in her eyes. Now, I continued, closing the file and folding my hands on top of it, I'm sure you can understand why this particular incident might be relevant to your employment application. Because you see, Ava, I'm not just some random interviewer who happened to be assigned your case. I am the senior nurse educator, which means every single person who wants to work in the nursing department of this hospital has to go through me first. Every application crosses my desk. Every recommendation requires my signature. And right now, your entire future career at this hospital, the hospital you've apparently dreamed of working at permanently, is sitting in my hands. I picked up my pen and held it over her application form, letting her see how easy it would be for me to just write "rejected" across the top and end this whole thing right now. I could see actual panic in her eyes at this point, and I'm not going to lie, part of me was enjoying watching her finally understand the consequences of her actions, but I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. You know what the ironic thing is, Ava? I said, setting down my pen and looking at her directly. I actually think you have potential as a nurse. Your grades from nursing school are excellent, your technical knowledge is solid, and when you actually bother to apply yourself, you're quite skilled with procedures. The problem isn't your ability, it's your attitude. You came into this hospital thinking that your family's money and your prestigious education entitled you to respect that you hadn't earned. You treated experienced professionals like they were obstacles in your way instead of teachers who could help you grow. And worst of all, you forgot the single most important rule of healthcare. I leaned forward, making sure she was looking right at me. This isn't about you, Ava. It's about the patients. Every single thing we do in this hospital, from the most complex surgery to changing a bedpan, is about making sure that the people who come through our doors get the best possible care. Your ego, my ego, none of that matters compared to saving lives. And until you understand that deep in your bones, you will never be more than a mediocre nurse, no matter how good your grades are or how expensive your education was. Ava was crying now, tears running down her face, and her voice was shaking when she spoke. "You're right," she said, and I could tell she actually meant it this time. Not like those half-hearted apologies she'd given during her internship when someone called her out. I was arrogant and disrespectful, and I thought I knew everything. I humiliated you in front of everyone, and you didn't deserve that. I don't expect you to give me this job, Ms. Mitchell. I just want you to know that I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. I watched her for a long moment, trying to decide if this was genuine remorse or just desperation to get the job. Then I did something that surprised both of us. I stood up, walked around my desk, and pulled a second chair over so I was sitting next to her instead of across from her. "Ava," I said, and my voice was gentler now, "I'm not going to reject your application." Her head snapped up and she stared at me with complete shock. "You're not." But I thought... I held up my hand to stop her. "I'm not going to reject it," I said, "but I'm also not going to approve it. Not yet. Instead, I'm going to offer you something else, something that might be even harder than getting rejected. I'm going to give you a second chance, but it comes with conditions that you have to agree to right now, and if you break any of them, you're done. No appeals, no second chances." She wiped her eyes and nodded quickly. "Anything," she said. "I'll do anything." "Here's what's going to happen," I told her, leaning back in my chair. "You're going to start a special 30-day probationary period, effective immediately. For the next month, you will shadow me personally during every shift I work. You will arrive 30 minutes before I do and leave 30 minutes after I do. You will do every task I assign you, no matter how small or how menial you think it is, and you will do it with a smile and without complaining. You will treat every single person in this hospital, from the janitors to the chief of surgery, with absolute respect. And most importantly, you will keep a daily journal documenting what you learned, what mistakes you made, and how you plan to improve. At the end of 30 days, if I believe you've genuinely changed and understood what it means to be a nurse, I will approve your application. If not, I will personally ensure that every hospital in Houston knows exactly why you were rejected. Do you accept these terms?" Ava was nodding before I even finished talking. "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes, I accept. Thank you so much, Ms. Mitchell. I won't let you down, I promise." "Good," I said, standing up and walking back around to my desk. "Then we start tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. Don't be late because that would be breaking the conditions already." She stood up quickly, wiping the last of her tears away, and for the first time since I'd met her, she actually looked humble. She walked to the door, then turned back to me. "Miss Mitchell," she said quietly, "why are you giving me this chance? After everything I did, after how I treated you, why would you help me?" I looked at her and smiled, a real smile this time. "Because, Ava, someone gave me a second chance once, many years ago when I was young and stupid and thought I knew everything, and that chance changed my entire life. I became the nurse I am today because someone believed I could be better than I was. Now I'm passing that gift forward to you. Don't waste it." She nodded, more tears starting up again, and whispered thank you before leaving my office. When the door closed behind her, I sat back down at my desk and let out a long breath. Sarah knocked and came in a moment later, looking at me with wide eyes. "Did I just hear crying from your office?" she asked. "Was that Ava Thompson?" "It was," I said, taking a sip of my now cold coffee. "And Sarah, clear my schedule for the next month. I'm going to be doing some very important teaching." The next morning at 5:25 a.m., I pulled into the hospital parking lot wondering if Ava would actually show up or if yesterday's tears and promises had just been an act to save her career. The sky was still dark, that deep purple color right before sunrise, and the parking lot was almost empty except for the night shift workers' cars. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat and started walking toward the entrance. And that's when I saw her standing by the main doors, wearing fresh scrubs and holding 2 cups of coffee from the Starbucks down the street. She looked tired, like maybe she hadn't slept much, but she was there, and she was early. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," she said as I approached, holding out one of the coffee cups to me. I wasn't sure how you take it, so I got a medium roast with room for cream. I took the coffee and looked at her carefully, trying to see if this was genuine or just another performance. "Thank you, Ava," I said. That was thoughtful. We walked into the hospital together, and I could feel how nervous she was, how she kept glancing at me like she was waiting for me to suddenly change my mind and tell her to leave. We went straight to the locker room where I showed her the locker that would be hers for the next month, right next to mine. As we were changing into our work shoes, I started explaining what the day would look like. "We'll start in the ICU this morning," I told her, checking equipment and doing morning assessments with the night shift before they leave. Then we move to the general medical floor for medication rounds. After that, we have a training session with the new interns at 10. Lunch is whenever we can grab it, and the afternoon will be in the emergency room. She was listening intently, nodding at everything I said, and I noticed she had a small notebook in her pocket that she kept touching, like she was making sure it was still there. The ICU was quiet when we arrived, just the soft beeping of monitors and the whoosh of ventilators. I introduced Ava to Marcus, the night shift charge nurse, who raised his eyebrows when he saw her with me because everyone in the hospital had heard about what happened in the ER 3 days ago. "Marcus," I said, "Ava is going to be shadowing me for the next month as part of a special training program. She'll be observing and assisting with all patient care activities." He nodded slowly, still looking skeptical, but he handed us the patient charts and started giving report. We had 6 patients in the ICU that morning, including a 72-year-old man recovering from open heart surgery, a young woman who'd been in a severe car accident, and a teenage boy with complications from diabetes. I took Ava to each bedside and showed her how to do a proper head-to-toe assessment, explaining why we check certain things in a specific order, how to read the monitors, what subtle changes might indicate a problem before it becomes critical. She watched everything carefully and asked thoughtful questions, real questions about patient care, instead of trying to show off how much she already knew. When we got to the young woman from the car accident, I noticed Ava's hands were shaking slightly as she helped me adjust the patient's position to prevent bed sores. "Are you okay?" I asked her quietly, and she nodded, but I could see tears forming in her eyes. "It's just," she whispered, looking at the patient's bruised face and all the tubes and wires. This could have been me or one of my friends. We drive that same highway all the time. I never really thought about what happens after the accident, about all the people working to keep someone alive. I put my hand on her shoulder. "That's why we do this job, Ava. Every single patient in this hospital is someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's parent, or friend. They're not just cases or learning opportunities. They're human beings having the worst day of their lives, and we get to be the ones who help them through it." By the time we finished in the ICU and moved to the medical floor, word had spread that Ava Thompson was following Clara Mitchell around like a shadow, and I could see other staff members watching us with curiosity. Some of them looked satisfied, like they were glad to see the arrogant intern getting taken down a peg, while others seemed surprised that I hadn't just rejected her application outright. During medication rounds, I had Ava check every single medication against the patient's chart, explain what each drug was for, what side effects to watch for, and why the timing mattered. At first, she rattled off textbook definitions, but I kept pushing her to think deeper, to connect the dots between the diagnosis and the treatment and the patient's individual circumstances. We were in room 412 giving medications to an elderly woman with congestive heart failure when Ava made her first real mistake of the day. She had prepared the patient's diuretic medication, but she'd calculated the dosage based on the order from 2 days ago instead of the updated order from this morning. I caught it before she gave the medication, but just barely. I took the medication cup from her hand and said quietly, "Check the order again." And I watched her face go pale as she realized what she'd almost done. "If I had given her that dose," she said, her voice shaking, "she could have become severely dehydrated. Her kidneys could have been damaged. She could have—" "But you didn't give it to her," I interrupted, "because you're learning to slow down and double-check everything, which is exactly what this month is about. Mistakes happen, Ava, even to experienced nurses. What separates a good nurse from a dangerous one is catching those mistakes before they reach the patient. Now calculate the correct dose and let's continue." She nodded, took a deep breath, and recalculated everything carefully before preparing a new dose. After we left that room, she wrote in her notebook for several minutes, and when I glanced over her shoulder, I saw she'd written, "Today I almost hurt someone by being careless," in large letters at the top of the page. The training session with the new interns at 10 o'clock was interesting because Ava got to see what it was like on the other side. We were teaching proper IV insertion techniques, and I had set up practice arms with fake veins filled with red liquid. The new interns were nervous and excited, asking a million questions, and I could see Ava remembering when she had been in their position just a few months ago. I demonstrated the technique first, talking through each step, and then I had the interns practice, while Ava and I walked around offering guidance and corrections. One of the interns, a shy young man named David, was struggling to find the vein and getting more frustrated with each failed attempt. Ava knelt down next to him, and I heard her say gently, "It's okay. Everyone struggles with this at first. The trick is to feel for it, rather than just looking. Here, close your eyes and just use your fingers to find the firmness of the vein under the skin." Her voice was patient and encouraging, completely different from the condescending tone she'd used during her own internship. After the training session, we grabbed sandwiches from the cafeteria and ate them while walking to the emergency room for the afternoon shift. I could tell Ava was dreading going back to the ER because that was where she'd humiliated me, where everyone had witnessed her meltdown. When we pushed through the double doors, several staff members looked up and the room got noticeably quieter. I walked straight to the nurse's station where Jennifer, the ER head nurse, was organizing charts. "Jennifer," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Ava is going to be working with us this afternoon as part of her probationary training. Please treat her as you would any other learning nurse and feel free to assign her appropriate tasks." Jennifer looked at Ava for a long moment, then nodded. "Fine," she said. "We've got a full house today so we can use the extra hands. Ava, you can start by restocking the trauma bays and checking all the crash cart supplies." Ava immediately said yes, ma'am, and headed off to do exactly that without a single complaint, even though restocking was typically a job for the newest, most junior staff members. I watched her work throughout the afternoon, seeing how she interacted with patients, how she responded when doctors gave her instructions, how she handled the chaos and stress of the ER. She was efficient and thorough, but more importantly, she was humble and willing to do whatever was needed. Around 4 o'clock, the tones went off for an incoming trauma, a construction worker who had fallen from scaffolding with multiple injuries. The ambulance pulled up and we all rushed out to meet it, with me directing Ava to stay close and observe. The paramedics were doing chest compressions as they wheeled the stretcher in, shouting out vital signs and what they'd done on scene. We got the patient into Trauma Bay 1 and it was controlled chaos, with doctors shouting orders, nurses pushing medications, respiratory therapy managing the airway. I pulled Ava into a corner where she could see everything but stay out of the way. "This is what it's really about," I told her as we watched the team work to save this man's life. All the book knowledge, all the technical skills, they all come together in moments like this. Every person in this room has a specific role, and they trust each other completely because they've trained for this. They've worked together. They've built that trust through respect and professionalism. We worked on that patient for 40 minutes before we got him stable enough to go to surgery. When things finally calmed down, I saw Ava wiping tears from her face. "Is he going to make it?" she asked, and I had to be honest with her. "I don't know," I said. "We did everything we could, and now it's up to the surgeons and up to him. Sometimes we save them and sometimes we don't, but we never stop fighting for every single life that comes through those doors." She nodded and wrote something else in her notebook. By the time our shift ended at 7 p.m., Ava looked absolutely exhausted, physically and emotionally drained. We walked out to the parking lot together and she turned to me before getting into her car. "Miss Mitchell," she said, "I just want to say thank you for today. I learned more in these 14 hours than I did in my entire internship. I know I have 29 more days to prove myself, but I want you to know that I'm taking this seriously. I'm not going to let you down." I smiled at her. "You're not doing this for me, Ava. You're doing it for yourself and for every patient you'll ever care for. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 5:30. She drove away, and I sat in my car for a few minutes, thinking about how the day had gone. Maybe this second chance idea wasn't so crazy after all. The next few days followed a similar pattern, with Ava showing up early every morning with coffee and throwing herself completely into whatever tasks I assigned her. I started varying her assignments more, taking her to different departments, exposing her to different types of patients and situations. On day 4, we spent the morning in pediatrics, and I watched Ava's entire demeanor change when working with sick children. She was naturally gentle and playful with them, making scary procedures less frightening by turning them into games, singing silly songs while checking blood pressure, letting kids pick out their favorite colored bandages. One little girl, maybe 6 years old with leukemia, asked Ava if she was a princess because of her blonde hair, and Ava knelt down and whispered that she was actually a superhero nurse in disguise, and that they were going to fight the bad cells together. After we left that patient's room, Ava was quiet for a long time. "I never thought about working in pediatrics," she finally said. "In school, I always assumed I wanted to be in some prestigious surgical unit or maybe trauma. But these kids, they're so brave and they trust us completely. It makes everything feel more important somehow." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Pediatrics changes you," I told her. "It's one of the hardest departments emotionally, but also one of the most rewarding. Keep an open mind about where you want to end up, because sometimes the path you're meant to be on isn't the one you originally planned. On day 7, we had our first real crisis. We were in the medical surgical unit doing wound care when one of my patients, a 65-year-old man recovering from bowel surgery, suddenly crashed. His blood pressure dropped, his heart rate spiked, and he became unresponsive within seconds. I immediately called a code blue while starting chest compressions, and Ava jumped in without being asked, grabbing the crash cart and setting up the defibrillator exactly as she'd been trained. The code team arrived within minutes, but those first few minutes were critical, and Ava performed flawlessly under pressure. She anticipated what I needed before I asked for it, kept perfect count during compressions when I needed a break, drew up medications quickly and accurately. We got him back after about 10 minutes. His heart rhythm stabilized, and he was rushed to the ICU. Afterward, in the stairwell where we'd gone to catch our breath, Ava was shaking. "I almost froze," she admitted. When I saw him go unconscious, my first instinct was panic. But then I heard your voice in my head from all our training sessions saying, "Stay calm, follow your training, focus on the patient," and I just did what I knew how to do. I looked at her with genuine pride. "That was excellent work, Ava. You were calm, efficient, and professional. That man is alive right now in part because of what you did in those first critical minutes." She looked at me with surprise. "Really? You mean that?" "I absolutely mean it. You proved today that you have the instincts and the skills to be a truly good nurse when you get out of your own way and focus on what matters." That night, Ava's journal entry must have been long because I saw her sitting in the locker room for almost 30 minutes after her shift ended, writing page after page. I didn't ask what she wrote, but I could see her wiping tears away as she wrote, and I knew something fundamental was shifting inside her. The arrogant, entitled intern was slowly being replaced by someone who actually understood what it meant to be a healer. By the end of the second week, other staff members were starting to change their opinions about Ava. I overheard Jennifer telling another nurse that the girl has really turned herself around. I never would have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself. Marcus in the ICU asked me if Ava could shadow him during a night shift because she'd asked such good questions about overnight care management. Even Dr. Harrison, who Ava had been disrespectful to during her internship, pulled me aside and said, "Whatever you're doing with that girl, it's working." She actually apologized to me yesterday for her behavior, and it seemed genuine. But the real test came on day 17. I got called into a meeting with the hospital administrator, Dr. Patricia Chen, and the director of human resources. When I walked into the conference room, they both had serious expressions on their faces. "Clara," Dr. Chen said, gesturing for me to sit down, "we need to talk about Ava Thompson." My heart sank because I thought maybe someone had complained about her, or maybe upper management had decided that giving her a second chance was a bad precedent to set. But then Dr. Chen smiled slightly. "We've been getting reports from various departments about the dramatic improvement in her attitude and performance," she said. "Multiple staff members have commented that she's like a completely different person. I'm curious about your assessment of her progress and whether you think she's genuinely changed or if this is just an act to secure employment." I thought carefully about my answer because this wasn't just about Ava anymore. It was about my judgment and my credibility as an educator. "I think the change is genuine," I said. "When someone makes a mistake born from arrogance, you have two choices. You can punish them and send them away, or you can teach them why they were wrong and give them a chance to become better." Ava chose to learn. She's shown up every single day, ready to work. She's done every task I've assigned without complaint. She's been respectful to everyone regardless of their position. And most importantly, she's connected with patients in a way that shows real compassion. Could she revert back to her old ways? Possibly. But I believe that the humiliation of having her career in my hands, combined with genuine exposure to what nursing really means, has created lasting change. Dr. Chen and the HR director exchanged glances. "The reason we're asking," the HR director said, "is because we've received a complaint." My stomach dropped. Ava's father called the hospital yesterday, she continued, and he was extremely angry about the probationary period you've implemented. He claims you're hazing his daughter as revenge for the incident in the ER, and he's threatening legal action if we don't immediately approve her application or release her from the program. He also suggested that his family makes significant charitable donations to this hospital, and it would be unfortunate if those donations were to stop. I felt anger rising in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. Did Ava file this complaint herself? I asked. Or did her father do this without her knowledge? We don't know, Dr. Chen said, which is why we want to bring Ava in here right now and get her perspective directly. If she supports her father's complaint, we'll have to end the probationary period immediately and make a decision about her employment. If she doesn't support it, then we'll back your program completely. Are you comfortable with that? I nodded, even though my mind was racing. Everything I'd worked for with Ava over the past 17 days could be destroyed in the next few minutes if she chose to side with her father's money and influence over the growth she'd experienced. Dr. Chen called Ava's cell phone and asked her to come to the conference room immediately. While we waited, I tried to read Dr. Chen's expression to see if she was on my side or preparing to shut down my program, but her face was neutral and professional. When Ava walked into the conference room 5 minutes later, still in her scrubs from our morning shift, she looked confused and worried. She glanced at me, and I tried to give her a reassuring look, but I honestly didn't know what was about to happen. Ava, Dr. Chen said, please sit down. We need to ask you about a phone call we received from your father yesterday. Ava's face went pale and then bright red. Oh no, she whispered. What did he say? Dr. Chen explained the complaint about hazing and revenge and legal threats and charitable donations. As she talked, I watched Ava's expression go from worried to angry to absolutely mortified. When Dr. Chen finished, there was silence in the room. Ava, the HR director, said gently, we need to know if you support your father's complaint. Do you feel that Ms. Mitchell has been treating you unfairly or using this probationary period as revenge for what happened in the emergency room? Ava stood up suddenly and her voice was stronger than I'd ever heard it. No, she said firmly, absolutely not. Ms. Mitchell has been nothing but professional and patient with me, more patient than I deserved. Everything she's put me through over the past 17 days has been about teaching me to be a better nurse, not about revenge. I have learned more from her in 2.5 weeks than I learned in 4 years of nursing school, because she's shown me what this profession really means. My father had no right to make that call, and I'm absolutely furious that he tried to use his money and influence to interfere with my training. Dr. Chen raised her eyebrows. So you want to continue with the probationary period, even though your father is threatening legal action? Ava looked directly at me and her eyes were clear and determined. Yes, she said. I want to finish all 30 days and I want to earn this. Position the right way, not because my father bullied someone into giving it to me. Ms. Mitchell gave me a second chance when she could have destroyed my career with one signature, and I'm not going to let my father's ego ruin that. The HR director looked satisfied and started making notes, but Dr. Chen wasn't done yet. Ava, she said, leaning forward, I want you to understand something very important. If we allow you to continue this probationary period against your father's wishes, and if your family follows through on their threat to stop donating to this hospital, that will impact our budget significantly. Your father's foundation has contributed over $500,000 to our pediatric wing renovations. Are you prepared to deal with the consequences of that? Ava took a deep breath, and I could see her hands trembling slightly, but her voice stayed steady. Dr. Chen, she said, if my father stops donating to this hospital because his daughter chose to earn her position through merit instead of money, then that says everything about his character and nothing about this hospital's decision. I can't control what he does, but I can control what I do, and I choose to finish this program the right way. If that means he cuts me off financially or stops speaking to me, then I'll deal with that. Some things are more important than money. I felt a swell of pride in my chest that was so strong it almost brought tears to my eyes. This was not the same girl who had stood in the emergency room 2.5 weeks ago and called me a dinosaur. This was someone who had found her backbone and her integrity, and I knew in that moment that she was going to be an incredible nurse. Dr. Chen must have seen the same thing because she smiled and stood up, extending her hand to Ava. "I think we have our answer," she said. "Continue with the probationary period, and Ms. Thompson, I look forward to reading your final evaluation in about 2 weeks." Ava shook her hand and then turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry about my father," she said. "I didn't know he was going to call, and I would never ask him to do something like that." I pulled her into a hug right there in the conference room. "I know," I said, "and what you just did, standing up for yourself and for what's right, even when it might cost you everything, that took more courage than anything you've done in the past 17 days. Your father may not understand it now, but someday he'll be proud of the person you're becoming." We left the conference room together and went straight back to work, but something had fundamentally shifted. Ava had just burned a bridge with her family's money and influence to protect the integrity of her training, and everyone in the hospital would hear about it by the end of the day. That evening, as we were finishing up in the ER, Ava got a phone call that she stepped outside to take. When she came back 10 minutes later, her eyes were red and puffy from crying. "My father just told me I'm cut off," she said quietly. "No more credit cards, no more apartment rent being paid, no more car insurance. He said if I want to throw away the family name and work like a common laborer, I can support myself like one too." I felt a flash of anger at this man I'd never met, who valued his ego and control more than his daughter's growth and happiness. "Where are you going to stay tonight?" I asked, and she shrugged helplessly. "I have about $200 in my checking account and my apartment rent is due in 3 days. I guess I'll figure something out." I made a decision in that moment that I probably should have thought through more carefully, but sometimes you just have to follow your gut. "You're staying with me," I said. "I have a spare bedroom and you're not going to be homeless because you chose to do the right thing." Ava started to protest, but I held up my hand. "This isn't charity. It's practicality. You need to be able to focus on finishing your probationary period, not worrying about where you're going to sleep. We'll figure out longer-term arrangements later, but for now, you're coming home with me tonight." She hugged me and started crying again, thanking me over and over. I just patted her back and said, "Come on, let's go get your stuff before your father changes the locks." We spent that evening moving Ava's belongings out of her expensive downtown apartment and into my modest house in the suburbs. She didn't have much, just clothes and books and personal items, because most of the furniture had belonged to the apartment. As we carried boxes up to my spare bedroom, Ava kept looking around my house with this expression of wonder. "What is it?" I finally asked. And she said, "Your house feels like a home." My apartment always felt like a hotel, like I was just visiting my own life. But this, with your family photos on the walls, and your plants, and your grandmother's quilt on the couch, this feels real. I smiled and helped her unpack, and we stayed up late talking about everything except nursing for once. She told me about growing up with parents who measured success only in money and status, about always feeling like she had to prove she was worth their investment in her education, about never really having friends because everyone either wanted something from her family or resented her privilege. The next morning, we drove to the hospital together, and I could see other nurses noticing that Ava had arrived in my car. Word spread quickly about her father cutting her off, and the response from the staff was overwhelmingly supportive. People who had initially been skeptical about her transformation started offering help, bringing her groceries, giving her furniture they didn't need, even offering to help her find an affordable apartment when she was ready. Jennifer pulled me aside and said, "You know what you started here, don't you? You didn't just change one arrogant intern, you showed everyone in this hospital what real mentorship looks like. You could have crushed her, but instead you build her up, and now we all get to benefit from having another truly good nurse on our team." The final 12 days of Ava's probationary period were intense because I deliberately exposed her to the hardest cases and the most challenging situations. I wanted to be absolutely certain that her transformation was complete and that she could handle the worst that nursing had to offer. We worked a double shift in the ER during a major accident on the interstate, with ambulances bringing in trauma patients for hours. Ava never complained, never faltered, and when a young mother died despite our best efforts, I found Ava in the supply closet crying, but she wiped her eyes and said, "I need 5 minutes and then I'll be okay. There are still patients who need us." We worked an overnight shift in the ICU where we lost 2 patients within an hour of each other, and Ava held it together through both codes and then comforted the families with genuine compassion and grace. On day 28, I took her back to the pediatric oncology unit, where she discovered her passion for working with kids. We had a young patient, an 8-year-old boy named Michael, who had been fighting brain cancer for 2 years, and his parents had just made the decision to stop treatment and switch to comfort care. Ava sat with that family for 3 hours, holding Michael's hand, reading him stories, helping his parents understand what the dying process would look like, and assuring them that we would make sure he wasn't in pain. When Michael's mother broke down crying and said, "I don't know how to let him go," Ava held her and said, "You don't have to let him go. You just have to walk beside him on this part of his journey and trust that love doesn't end when the body does." I stood in the doorway watching this interaction and knew that Ava had found her calling. On the morning of day 30, Ava's last day of probation, I woke her up extra early because I had one final lesson planned. We drove to the hospital in darkness, and she asked where we were going. "You'll see," I said mysteriously. I led her through the quiet hallways to the chapel, a small, peaceful room on the second floor that most staff members forgot existed. We sat down in the wooden pews, and I handed her a candle. Every year, on the anniversary of my first day as a nurse, I told her, "I come here and light a candle for every patient I've lost. I remember their names, their faces, their families. I let myself feel the grief that I couldn't fully feel when it happened because I had to stay professional and keep working. And then I light another candle for every patient I've saved, every life I've touched, every family I've helped. Nursing is about balance, Ava. It's about holding joy and sorrow in the same hands, about celebrating victories and honoring losses, about being human even when people need you to be superhuman." We sat there together in the candlelight, and Ava told me about every patient who had impacted her over the past 30 days. She cried and laughed and processed everything she'd experienced, and I did the same. When we finally stood to leave, Ava said, "Ms. Mitchell, no matter what happens today with your evaluation, no matter whether you approve my application or not, I want you to know that this month has changed my life. I was a spoiled, arrogant kid who thought medicine was about prestige and proving I was smart. You taught me that it's about service and compassion and showing up every single day ready to be whatever your patients need you to be. Even if I never work here, I'll carry these lessons for the rest of my life." I smiled at her. "Well," I said, "I guess you'll find out in a few hours whether you'll be working here or not." We went through our morning routine, checking in with various departments, seeing patients, doing all the normal tasks. At 10 o'clock, I got a message from Dr. Chen asking Ava and me to come to her office. This was it, the moment of truth. We walked together to the administrative wing, and Ava's hand found mine in the elevator. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I failed? What if you don't think I'm ready?" I squeezed her hand but didn't answer because, honestly, I wanted her to sit with that fear and uncertainty for a little while longer. When we walked into Dr. Chen's office, the entire leadership team was there, which was unexpected and made Ava even more nervous. Dr. Chen gestured for us to sit and then looked at me. "Clara," she said, "you've completed the 30-day intensive mentorship program with Ava Thompson. The board and I would like to hear your final evaluation and your recommendation regarding her employment application." I pulled out a folder that I'd been working on for days, containing detailed notes from every shift, comments from other staff members, Ava's journal entries that she'd given me permission to share, and my final assessment. I opened the folder slowly, making eye contact with each person in the room before I began speaking. 30 days ago, I said, Ava Thompson was one of the most challenging interns I've ever worked with in my 15 years as a nurse educator. She was arrogant, disrespectful, entitled, and more focused on her own ego than on patient care. She publicly humiliated me in front of staff and patients, and frankly, I would have been completely justified in rejecting her application immediately and ensuring she never worked in this hospital. But instead, I chose to give her an opportunity that many people thought she didn't deserve. And I did it because I believe in the transformative power of genuine mentorship and because I saw potential underneath all that arrogance. I flipped through my notes. Over the past 30 days, Ava has worked approximately 420 hours under my direct supervision. She has cared for over 200 patients across 7 different departments. She has assisted with 3 code, blues, 2 rapid responses, and countless other critical situations. She has arrived early and stayed late every single day. She has completed a daily journal documenting her learning, her mistakes, and her growth. And most importantly, she has demonstrated a fundamental shift in her understanding of what it means to be a nurse. I pulled out specific examples from my notes. On day 4 in pediatrics, Ava discovered her passion for working with children and showed natural compassion in making frightening medical procedures less scary for young patients. On day 7 during a code blue, she performed flawlessly under pressure and helped save a patient's life. On day 17, when her father tried to use money and influence to force this hospital to approve her application, Ava stood in this very room and refused to allow it, even though it meant losing her financial support and being cut off from her family. On day 28, she sat with a dying child and his family for 3 hours, providing comfort that went far beyond her job description. This is not the same person who walked through our doors 11 weeks ago. I closed my folder and looked directly at Dr. Chen. My recommendation is that we approve Ava Thompson's application for permanent employment as a nursing assistant with the condition that she continue to be mentored closely for her first 6 months. I believe she has the skills, the compassion, and the character to be an exceptional nurse. More than that, I believe she represents what's possible when we choose to invest in people's potential rather than simply punishing their mistakes. The room was silent for a moment after I finished. Then Dr. Chen looked at Ava. "Ms. Thompson," she said, "do you have anything you'd like to say?" Ava stood up and her voice was shaking but clear. "I want to start by apologizing again to Ms. Mitchell and to everyone who witnessed my appalling behavior in the emergency room several weeks ago. There's no excuse for how I acted, no justification for my arrogance and disrespect. I came to this hospital thinking I already knew everything, and I've spent the past month learning that I knew almost nothing about what really matters." Ava pulled out her journal, which was now completely filled with her handwriting. This journal contains 30 days of lessons about medicine, about patient care, about human compassion, and about myself. I've documented every mistake I made, every patient who touched my heart, every moment when I realized how much I still have to learn. Ms. Mitchell showed me that the most powerful thing you can do for someone is believe in their ability to change and then give them the structure and support to actually do it. She was tough on me when I needed toughness, compassionate when I needed compassion, and patient beyond measure even when I didn't deserve it. If you give me this position, I promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the second chance she gave me. Dr. Chen looked around the room at the other administrators, and I could see them nodding. Then she stood up and extended her hand to Ava. "Welcome to Memorial Grace Hospital, Ms. Thompson," she said with a smile. "You've earned this position through dedication and growth, and we're proud to have you on our team." Ava shook her hand and then turned to me, and we hugged right there in front of everyone. "Thank you," she kept whispering. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." I just held her and said, "You did this yourself, Ava. I just gave you the opportunity and you chose to take it." Over the next few months, Ava settled into her permanent position and continued to impress everyone with her work ethic and compassion. She found an affordable apartment with 2 other nurses, started paying her own bills, and seemed genuinely happy with her new independent life. Her father had still not reached out to her, but she told me she was okay with that because she'd realized she needed to build her own identity separate from her family's money and expectations. Then one Friday night, 3 months into Ava's permanent position, something unexpected happened that would change everything. The emergency room was chaotic with a multi-vehicle pileup bringing in dozens of trauma patients. I was working on a gunshot victim when I heard shouting coming from another bay, and the voice was horribly familiar. I ran over to find Ava's father, Richard Thompson, on a stretcher with symptoms of a heart attack. His face was gray, he was clutching his chest, and he was demanding a real doctor immediately, not these incompetent nurses. Then he saw Ava standing in the doorway, frozen in shock. "You!" he shouted, pointing at her. "What the hell are you doing here? Is this what you wanted? To watch your father die because you were too stubborn to listen?" Ava's face was completely white, but she walked into the room with steady steps. "Dad," she said quietly, "you need to calm down and let the doctor examine you. Getting agitated is only making your symptoms worse." He tried to sit up, but we pushed him back down. "I don't need medical advice from a traitor," he spat at her. I stepped between Richard and Ava. "Mr. Thompson," I said in my firmest voice, "I understand you're scared and in pain, but if you don't calm down and allow us to treat you, you could die. Your daughter is an excellent nurse, and we need her help to save your life, so you can either accept that and cooperate, or you can sign yourself out against medical advice. Now what's it going to be?" He glared at me with absolute hatred, but something in my voice got through because he stopped fighting and laid back. "Fine," he muttered, "but I want it noted that I'm only accepting treatment under duress." The next hour was professionally challenging because I had to watch Ava treat her father with perfect medical care, while he continued to belittle and insult her with almost every breath. He criticized her IV technique, mocked her for checking his vitals too, frequently made snide comments about how she'd thrown away her education to be a glorified waitress. But Ava never wavered, never let her personal feelings interfere with her professional responsibilities. When his test results came back, showing he was having an actual heart attack and needed emergency catheterization, Ava was the one who gently explained what that meant and what the procedure would involve. "You're saying I need heart surgery," Richard said, his voice finally showing some fear. Ava shook her head. "Not surgery exactly, Dad. A cardiac catheterization where they'll open up the blocked artery in your heart. It's a standard procedure with excellent outcomes. You're going to be okay, but we need to move quickly." He looked at her for a long moment, and I saw his anger crack slightly. "You really think I'll be okay?" he asked, and his voice sounded almost vulnerable. Ava took his hand and squeezed it. "I know you will," she said, "because you're stubborn and strong and you're getting the best possible care. I'm going to stay with you until they take you up, and I'll be here when you wake up." As they were wheeling him out, he grabbed Ava's arm. "If I don't make it," he said, "tell your mother I'm sorry I was such a stubborn fool." Ava leaned down and kissed his forehead. "You'll tell her yourself, Dad, because you're going to be fine. I promise." After he was taken upstairs, Ava collapsed into a chair and put her head in her hands. I sat next to her and put my arm around her shoulders. "You did incredible work in there," I told her. She looked up with tears streaming down her face. "I'm terrified I'm going to lose him before we can fix things between us," she said. "We got word that Richard's procedure had been successful, and he was in the cardiac ICU. Ava immediately went upstairs, and I followed. When we walked into his room, Richard was awake but groggy. He saw Ava and tried to smile. "They tell me you saved my life downstairs," he said weakly. Ava pulled a chair next to his bed. "I was just doing my job, Dad," she said softly. Richard shook his head. "No, You were being a better person than your old man deserved. I've spent 3 months telling myself you threw away everything I gave you, that you were wasting your potential. But lying on that stretcher tonight, watching you take care of me even after how I treated you, I finally understood. This isn't menial work. What you do matters more than any business deal I've ever made. You're saving lives, Ava. Real, actual human lives. And I've been too blind and proud to see it. Ava was crying openly now. I needed to find my own path, Dad, she said. Not the one you wanted for me, but the one that makes me feel like I'm making a difference. I'm sorry my choices hurt you, but I'm not sorry for making them because I'm finally happy. Richard squeezed her hand weakly. I'm proud of you too, baby girl, he whispered. It took almost dying to see it, but I'm proud of the woman you've become, and I'm sorry for cutting you off, for trying to force you to live the life I wanted. Can you forgive a stubborn old fool? Ava leaned down and hugged him carefully. Already forgiven, Dad, she said. Just focus on getting better. We have a lot of time to make up for. Richard stayed in the hospital for 5 days, and I watched their relationship slowly rebuild with honest conversations replacing the anger and resentment. Before he was discharged, he asked to speak with me privately. Ms. Mitchell, he said, I owe you an enormous apology. When my attorney told me about your probationary program, I threatened this hospital with legal action because I thought you were abusing your position to punish my daughter. I've since learned that you were actually saving her from becoming a terrible nurse and an even worse person. Whatever you did during those 30 days worked because Ava is happier than I've ever seen her. Thank you for caring enough about her to be tough when she needed it. He pulled out his checkbook. I'd like to make a donation to the hospital, he said. I thought for a moment. We're starting a new mentorship and redemption program for healthcare professionals who need intensive guidance, I said. A donation to that program would help us provide the same transformation for others that your daughter experienced. He wrote a check for $250,000 right then and handed it to me. Make sure it helps other stubborn kids like Ava find their way, he said. 6 months after Ava became permanent staff, she knocked on my office door with an enormous smile and an official envelope. She handed it to me, and I opened it to find an acceptance letter from one of the most competitive pediatric nursing specialist programs in the country. Ava, this is incredible, I said with tears in my eyes. They only accept 15 nurses per year out of hundreds of applicants. She nodded, her own eyes wet. I never would have even thought to apply if you hadn't shown me that pediatrics was my calling. Remember that day with little Michael in pediatric oncology? That was the moment I knew what I wanted to do with my career. I want to help families through their darkest times, make sick children feel safe, turn procedures into adventures instead of nightmares. We talked about her plans and how the program would work with her current position. As she was leaving, she turned back. Clara, she said, using my first name now that we'd become genuine friends, when I finish this program in 2 years, would you write me a letter of recommendation? I'm thinking about becoming a pediatric nurse practitioner after that. I smiled and said, Ava, I would be honored. I already know what I'm going to say. I'm going to tell them about an arrogant young woman who made terrible mistakes and then chose to learn from them. I'm going to tell them about a nurse who stood up to her wealthy father to protect her integrity, who comforted dying children with extraordinary compassion, who turned herself into one of the finest nurses I've ever taught. And I'm going to tell them that if they're smart, they'll accept you immediately. 2 years later, I was asked to present our redemption program at a national nursing conference in Chicago. I brought Ava as a co-presenter, and together we told our story. The room was packed with hundreds of nurses and educators, and when we finished, the standing ovation lasted almost 5 minutes. Dozens of people came up wanting to know how they could implement similar programs at their hospitals. One woman from California told me she'd been about to reject a young nurse for a medication error, But after hearing our presentation, she was going to give that nurse a structured second chance instead. "You made me realize that our job isn't just to promote people who are already perfect," she said. "It's to shape people who have potential with proper guidance." Today, 5 years after that night in the emergency room, Ava Thompson is a board-certified pediatric nurse practitioner and one of the youngest department directors in our hospital's history. She oversees a team of 50 nurses and provides specialized care to some of the sickest children in Texas. She's published research, spoken at international conferences, and mentored dozens of young nurses who remind her of who she used to be. Her father, Richard, serves on the hospital board and has donated millions to nursing education initiatives. Her mother volunteers in the pediatric wing twice a week. As for me, I'm still teaching, still looking for opportunities to see potential in people others have written off, still believing that transformation is possible. The Redemption Program continues to thrive, having helped over 200 healthcare professionals find their way back from mistakes that could have ended their careers. I think about that night often, about how easy it would have been to stamp rejected across Ava's application. I think about how tempting it was to use my power to punish someone who had humiliated me publicly. And I think about how glad I am that I chose a different path. Because here's what I learned. The most powerful thing any of us can do is give someone a genuine second chance, not superficial forgiveness, but a real opportunity that requires our time, energy, and faith in human capacity for growth. Ava didn't need me to be nice to her. She needed me to be tough and fair and unwavering in my expectations, while also being patient and supportive and willing to see past her worst moment to her best potential. That's what real mentorship looks like. That's what transforms lives. So if you're in a position of power over someone's career, I want to challenge you. The next time someone makes a terrible mistake or shows a horrible attitude, pause before you destroy them. Ask yourself if there's a chance this person could become better with proper guidance. Ask if you're willing to invest in that possibility. And if the answer is yes, give them a structured opportunity to prove they can change. Set clear expectations, hold them accountable, but also believe in them and refuse to give up on their potential. Sometimes they'll fail and you'll look foolish for believing in them. But sometimes they'll succeed beyond your wildest expectations, and you'll have the incredible privilege of watching someone transform right before your eyes. And that is worth every risk, every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt. That's the miracle of mentorship. That's the power of second chances. I chose grace. She chose growth. Together we prove that people can change if they're given the right combination of accountability and opportunity. The world needs more second chances, more transformations, more stories of redemption. The world needs mentors who care enough to be tough and students brave enough to accept the challenge. That's my story. That's Ava's story. And I hope it inspires you to write your own story of second chances, because we're all just imperfect humans trying to become better versions of ourselves. And sometimes all we need is someone who believes we can do it and refuses to give up on us until we believe it too. Thank you for watching this to the end. Remember, you are capable of far more than you realize. And so is that person you're tempted to give up on. Don't waste the opportunity to find out what happens when you choose to believe in human potential.